Emma Campion is the pen name of Candace Robb, the author of the very popular Margaret Kern Owen Archer mysteries. She earned her PhD in medieval history and literature, a fact that is very apparent in the rich details of her work. This is Miss Campion's second historical novel. The first, The King's Mistress, is also available for purchase tonight. Again, thank you all for coming tonight, and please join me in welcoming Emma Campion to the podium.
Thanks for coming out on such a foggy night, and happy birthday, University Bookstore. I can't believe 115 years. Can you believe that? I wonder if in 115 years there will be another bookstore that can celebrate that with the way bookstores are going right now. So A Triple Knot is a book that I wanted to write because, well, actually both The King's Mistress and A Triple Knot were born from the research that I've been doing for the Owen Archer mysteries over the years. And I became fascinated by these women in Edward III's court who were not the princesses and the lovely ladies of luxury and leisure that we think of in court ladies. These were women who were really fighting for a kind of life that they felt was suitable for them, was comfortable for them, for a life of integrity. And Joan, in particular, Joan of Kent, amazes me because she was 12 years old when this book begins, and she makes an extraordinary decision about her life at this very young age. And what I wanted to examine in writing about her was what would bring a 12-year-old to a decision like this. She decides to marry someone at the age of 12. So I looked all over the place in research about her, and very, very little has actually been written about that particular decision, except the court case years later in which she annuls one marriage to be with another husband. So I thought, what could frighten a 12-year-old to do something like this? First of all, I figured out that Joan, well, we know that Joan was 3 or 4 years old when her father was beheaded, and he was the half-brother of the king. And this was when Isabella, Isabella of France, who was Edward II's queen, was when she rose in rebellion against her husband. And Joan's father, Edmund, at the last minute decided that he wanted to protect his brother, and it was because of this that he was beheaded. So at a very young age, she had this tragedy in her life. And where is the family taken in after this? But into the king and queen's household, the very family who had betrayed her father. So here is a young girl who, at such a young age, knows that you can trust no one, and that she is living in a family, in a court, in which she can never relax, she can never feel safe. And then at the age of 12, something happens, and she is sent to where the king and queen of England are in the Low Countries, in Antwerp at the beginning, to raise funds and to try to gain allies for a war with France. So you know that at the age of 12, she's a Plantagenet, she has royal blood. The reason they're taking her there is to marry her off to someone, to betroth her to someone that is going to create some liaison and alliance that will be very important to the King of England. So Joan knows this when she goes. She's without her mother, apparently. She went over there without that support. She's with the royal family. She doesn't trust the royal family. And then she meets the person who is the father of her intended. And that's a little piece I want to read to you. Because what I decided was, what is going to frighten a 12-year-old? Sexuality, and people treating her as a sexual object when she is just a young girl. So she is with her cousin Bella, Princess Isabella, and they're going into the hall when she's just arrived in Antwerp. A raucous swirl of color greeted them in the crowded hall. "We'll be able to see from atop a bench." Bella had a servant lift her up onto one near the door, then Joan. With much giggling, she pointed out the French fashion some of the young men were wearing, short jackets that revealed the shapes of their buttocks, ballot knives hanging over their codpieces. "Lady Lucienne says, if you've as yet no fortune, display the goods." Lucienne, Lady Townley, was the liveliest of all the Queen's ladies, a songbird among the crows. What Joan and Bella liked best about her was her irreverent wit and her refusal to shelter them from the salacious goings-on at court. Bella exclaimed over the prancing ponies and wondered how some of the younger women ever dared bend over. Their bodices were laced so tight and cut so low. "There is Jan, Duke of Brabant." She pointed to a squarely built man in a calf-length houppelon of green brocade with deep blue trim, a peacock feather in his hat. "That is not a friendly, but a cunning smile." "I will remember that," Joan said. "And the young woman surrounded by mother's ladies is Ned's future queen, Marguerite, daughter of the cunning peacock." Ned's future queen had a plain, though pleasant face, but her bright yellow silk gown with slashed sleeves, revealing a deep green silk beneath, seemed regal, elegant. "How old is she?" 16. But look, follow her gaze. It led back to a strikingly handsome man talking to Marguerite's father. Though his jacket was not cut so high as to be lewd, he wore it to such advantage that Joan felt herself blush to look on him, standing with chest thrown out, chin up, one leg slightly bent in front. "The Gascon stallion," Bella whispered. Can you blame Marguerite for adoring him? Dark eyes, dark hair, chiseled face, full lips, his garb sable velvet but for a crimson hat. Who is he? That, cousin, is Bernardo Azy, Lord of Albret, a powerful Gascon, another man father needs on his side. He is said to have asked for my hand, for his son, but father will not hear of it. I'm for someone grander. A pity, if his son is half as beautiful. Oh, look, there is someone far too skinny for the short fashion, Bella giggled. Joan glanced at the young noble whose leggings hung like empty sacks, but her eyes were drawn back to the Gascon stallion, then to a dark-haired, olive-skinned beauty in deep green silk slashed with cream and decorated with seed pearls headed in her direction. Lady Lucienne, Joan called. Perfuming the air with roses and spice, Lucienne bowed to Princess Isabella and whisked Joan away, keeping up a merry banter about the guests to put her at ease. She introduced her to German lords, dignitaries of Antwerp, Vilvoorde, and Brussels, as well as to one of Queen Philippa's brothers and an elderly aunt. Queen Philippa herself took over to introduce Joan to the Duke, his 16-year-old daughter, and the Sire d'Albret, before handing her back to Lucienne. Why was her grace so keen for me to meet the Gascon stallion? Joan asked Lucienne. Lucienne's laugh was wickedly throaty. Never let her grace or the other ladies hear you refer to him that way. Is that all Princess Isabella told you of him? Not how important he is to his grace in Gascony? Yes, but what is that to me? Is he peddling an air? Joan pretended she did not know where this might be going, curious to hear Lucienne's side. Aren't they all? Or a blushing daughter. Faith, I know little of his family, but that his wife, Lady Maith, was disappointed to be married off to someone not remotely related to Philip of Valois, no matter how handsome. How cold-blooded she must be. He is beautiful, is he not? Like a god. And then she's seated with him at the table. Marguerite of Brabant slipped into place beside Joan. As the first course was served, the two exchanged pleasantries. Then Marguerite turned to address the person on her other side. "My lady, have you tasted the mead?" Joan had not noticed the deep resonance of his voice when the queen introduced them. It was like a warm hand on her heart. She turned to the Sire d'Albret. "No, mead is too strong for my liking." "Too strong?" He reached beneath her hair, gently lifting it to the light, then arranging it on her shoulder, his hand brushing her neck. "You have the Plantagenet coloring and beauty, Lady Joan. Even young as you are, I see the woman who will be, a pearl beyond price." He proffered her his mazer, holding it close so that she smelled the honey. "A taste to bring a blush to your cheeks." He held it to her lips and tilted it. She sipped, feeling the heat. He smiled, lines radiating from his eyes. "Ah, another course." He abruptly turned away, breaking the spell. Joan had been holding her breath. Now, with the warmth of the mead coursing through her, she breathed deeply and stared down at her untouched food, her neck warm, her heart racing. She managed somehow to make idle conversation with Marguerite, though in her mind she was reliving how Albert had touched her hair, her neck, how strange he'd made her feel. By the time the meat courses gave way to savories, even the watered wine was too much for Joan, and she pushed her chair a little away from the table, preparing to withdraw with the excuse that it had been a long, tiring journey. Only then did Albert turn back to her. "Rest well, my lady." He kissed the top of her hand, then turned it over, brushing her palm with his lips, her fingers perforce stroking his face. "My lord," she breathed, withdrawing her hand, confused. Why was he behaving so with her? Did he mean to tease? Whispering her apologies to Marguerite, she fled the hall without a backward glance. So she's a 12-year-old. She's been brought into this strange situation, and this extremely handsome, magnetic man is flirting with her, and she doesn't quite know what to make of it. And as time goes on, he seems to pop up everywhere that she is. And of course, it's because he's looking her over for his son. But he's not behaving that way. I mean, he's behaving as if he's got his own claws into her. So with her father having been murdered in such a way, she has nightmares about him. And one of her most precious possessions is a drawing that he did of a white heart. And I have it's not a very good illustration on a book of the white heart. This is the one that King Richard II, her son, created as his emblem. And so it's the white hart, which was considered something that was quite royal, Caesar's stag. And he has a golden crown around his neck and a gold chain hanging from it into the grass, and the huge, marvelous rack of horns. And we know now that Richard II got this emblem from Joan, and that she and her future husband, the Black Prince, had a bed covering with the big white heart on it, and then with their own family crests on either side. So I use this image throughout the book. And in this dream, the reason I showed it to you is because when I talk about a heart in this dream, it's a stag, it's a deer, it's not a heart. Her father's voice rose on the air, leading her deeper into the wood. "Father, wait," she called. He gave no sign that he heard her, never faltering in his song. He pushed through a thicket of thorn bushes, the thorns catching at the wool of her gown, scratching her arms, her face. She caught a flash of white out of the corner of her eye, and suddenly she was through the thicket, stumbling into a glade wide enough that some light filtered through the trees in the center. There stood a heart, blood staining its white coat, dripping from something large caught on an antler. A low hum replaced her father's song. It seemed to come from the heart, beginning softly, gradually increasing in volume. Joan took a step toward it, then froze as an overwhelming sense of danger made her glance over her shoulder. Her heart pounded in her chest. Where was her father? She opened her mouth to call to him, but no sound came forth. The humming grew louder, louder. She took a few more steps toward the heart, trying to ignore the sense of something reaching out to her from behind. The mass on the antler seemed to move as if pulsing in rhythm with the humming. A few more steps, and she saw that it was a swarm of flies. The heart sensed her, turned to look at her. The flies rose up as the antler moved, allowing Joan to see what it was on which they fed. Her stomach turned. It was her father's head, horribly eaten. Joan screamed. "What is it, sweet Joan?" He was so close. She felt his breath on the back of her neck. She screamed again, and her nurse wakes her, and she can't go to sleep after that. So she decides to go out in the garden and gather dew from the lady's mantle growing there, her nurse Eva's herbal spell to free one's soul from a frightening dream. It's early morning. A thimble's worth of dew, then thrice round a willow. There was a great old willow out beyond the fruit trees. They're living in an abbey at this time in Antwerp, so old that it had been there when the river wall was built, and it curved round it, leaving just enough space for a slender person to pass between the wall and the trunk. She and Bella sometimes hid there to trade gossip. She picked a leaf from the bed of the lady's mantle, tipping her head back to drink the sweet dew. Now for the willow. Removing her shoes so that the dew-damp grass would not ruin them, she tucked her front hem into her girdle and ran across the lawn to the dry ground beneath the ancient willow. It was dark beneath its thick hanging branches, and the bole so broad that someone might hide on the far side. 3 grown men might just span the trunk with arms outstretched. She would not have dared make the circuit had this not been such a protected place, an abbey garden, surrounded by high walls patrolled by the king's guard. Even so, she shivered as she moved into the absolute dark inside the hanging foliage between the trunk and the wall, feeling her way over the twisted roots, one hand on the rough trunk for balance, barely breathing. Coming round to the orchard side, she found the rosy dawn replaced by a soft river mist, settling down over the fruit trees, chilling the air. Taking a deep breath, Joan wrapped her cloak more tightly about her and forced herself to begin the second circuit, telling herself that, now that she knew what to expect, it would not be so frightening. But the gloom had deepened and her heart pounded as she fought the memory of the dream, the hot breath on her neck. Who had it been? No, do not think of it. This is a cure. It will take away all memory of the horror. Her hand on the trunk, she focused on placing one foot in front of the other, whispering Hail Marys. The prayer was not part of Eva's cure, but it felt right. Her teeth chattered as the cold spread upward from her chilled feet. Holy Mary, Mother of God, I do not feel the cold, I do not feel the cold. My feet are warm, I am walking on sun-warmed sand. Coming out again within view of the orchard, she was torn between pushing on for the third circuit, because to pause was to cool down even more, or to sit down on the grass and cover her feet until they warmed a little. She remembered Eva telling her that a counterspell once begun must not be abandoned, or else the power of the original spell tripled. She pushed on, back into the darkness, her feet so cold now that she had trouble feeling for her balance. But the dream had been so frightening, she must complete this counterspell, or she would be afraid to sleep. She felt the wall beside her, the halfway mark. A shudder went through her, forcing her to pause and catch her breath. She felt a presence. Behind or ahead? Behind. She hurried forward, saying a prayer of thanks when, once more, she could see the orchard through the foliage. Silly Joan, you frightened yourself. But she had completed the spell. The dream was dead. Slipping down, she rested against the trunk, closing her eyes, catching her breath. What have we here? An orchard sprite? Startled, Joan tried to rise, but Lord Bernardo put his hands on her shoulders as he crouched down, trapping her as he slipped a hand beneath her skirt to touch her bare feet. Is she real? Ah, yes, I feel flesh. but so cold. He rubbed a foot in his warm hands, the action pushing up her skirt and causing a strange sensation up her thighs. Her whole body flushed and tingled. What was he doing? She pushed at his hand and pressed her legs together, trying to twist away. Stop! Leave me alone! Let me warm the other, my sweet. He kissed her forehead as he reached for the other foot, tucked farther under her. Don't touch me, she shrieked, hoping someone would hear. My lord! A man's voice called sharply. God be thanked. Thomas had come to save her. With amazing speed, Bernardo scooped Joan up and turned with her in his arms. Ah, Sir Thomas, you catch me in the act of rescue. It is most fortunate that after a long night in the war room, I came out to clear my head. I discovered Lady Joan asleep beneath the tree. The fog moved in so quickly she is cold to the touch, yet warm enough to cry out, my lord. My squire will see her safely to her quarters, Thomas said firmly. He handed Joan's shoes to Hugh, and then lifted her from Bernardo's arms, steadying her as he set her down. She was crying by now, her relief overshadowed by her humiliation. So what I decided, what I'm doing with that is I thought, what is it that historians can never find? We never know. And that's the motivations, really the emotions, what really drew someone to make the decision that they made. And with Joan, a 12-year-old, she makes a remarkable decision after this about defying the king and choosing her own husband at a very young age, away from her mother. It's a secret marriage, and I thought, you know, what could cause her to make a decision like that? And to me, it was pretty clear that it was probably fear that she would wind up married to the son of this man who she would never feel safe with. And she's already never felt safe in her life. I think that that's one of the things that historical novelists can do that historians can't do, is try to, I mean, we read all the facts, and really the reason that I write historicals, I mean, I write historical crime, I write historical novels, is that I really want to sort of try to feel what it was like, figure out what it might have been like to live back in that time, because I'm just fascinated by the time. And what we can do, and when I talk to historians, what they always urge me to do is look between the facts. How can you put them together? How can you connect them and make it an emotional experience? Because all of these very significant decisions that people make, why we go to war, why we marry the people that we marry, why you execute someone, is always coming from some deep place within that the historical record simply has no way of recording, especially in the 14th century. I mean, we don't have people's diaries, we have very few letters. I really envy the people who write Victorian period, and they have all these letters to work with, and newspaper clippings, and people's diaries, and photographs of people in the late Victorian period. It's just amazing, but my heart's in the 14th century, and it's a much more difficult time to get a grasp on. But I hope that kind of enticed you into the book. Joan of Kent is known as a woman who had quite a love life, 3 marriages, give or take, and she had quite a reputation. But the important thing to me was how young she was when this all began, and the fact that she was the child of a man who had been executed by her own family. I mean, the Plantagenets were her own family. And one thing I wanted to share with you that I'm doing some research for a new mystery series, and I'm working with twins. And I was looking around for what the theory was in the Middle Ages about how twins occurred. And one of the theories is that it was a woman who had twins, or multiple births of any kind, was thought to have been too oversexed. because she moved around too much in the act, and women actually had more than one womb. And so if she moved around too much, then it seeded 2 children or 3 children or whatever, and I thought, that is one of the silliest explanations, but this is in a period when they also talked about wandering wombs, so that could wander all over your body, so it's often fun to try to do research on some of the things that scientifically now we look at and we think is so silly, but I don't know. Who knew why you had twins back then? I mean, it was probably the best answer they could come up with. Anyway, I'd like to open it up to questions now, if anybody has some questions about the book or Pete.
I'm interested in the tension between historical and fictional. If you say your book is 2/3 fiction, how thoroughly grounded? Another way of asking the question: if Joan could read this book, do you think she'd say yes, or where did she come up with all this stuff?
I hope she would say yes, but I don't know. Especially for women in the 14th century, we only have these little bits of facts. We actually know more about Joan than we do about most other women of the period. But the facts in this book are my connect the dots, and we know that there was a proposed marriage with Dalbrecht's son, that there is a letter about it, there is a record about it, and then it never happens, and it's never mentioned again. And so that was what I built this on. And then I talked with Anthony Goodman, who is doing a biography of Joan of Kent, about where Joan would have been at 12. And he's pretty certain that she was in Antwerp with the royal family, that she'd been sent over there. So that's how I pieced together the facts. And of course we know about her and Thomas from the Roman court records. And so I just kind of connect those dots. And I would say probably that more than 50% of it is fiction, because how can we know? Especially the emotional part of it and what her motivation was. Yeah.
So as a writer, do you like being constrained by what we know of history, or would you rather just write?
Well, I like, you know, I want to know about the history, and I'm writing about the 14th century because I really love getting into the nitty-gritty of what actually happened. But I found, you know, when I started out writing, this is the sort of book I wanted to write, a sort of a biographical novel. But it was very hard to sell that kind of thing then, so I started writing the crime series. And so for 13 books, I thought, well, this isn't really my second choice, but my first choice would be this sort of book. So now I've written 2, The King's Mistress and A Triple Knot, of where, you know, I am really constrained by what we do know about these women, and I can't change the outcome. And now I'm going back to the crime series with joy, because I have you know, the plot is mine. You know, I can decide with my main character what their outcome is, whether they're going to live happily ever after, and, you know, the plot is all mine. And I do have, you know, I'm still working with real historic figures, but I didn't know that I didn't know how much I was enjoying myself until I wrote these 2 books, and then I decided, no, I'm going back to the crime novels. It's a lot more fun.
When you go back to the crime novels, would you also go back to your other name?
Oh yes, yeah.
So
Yeah. You know, the Emma Campion this came out of my British publisher, who decided that their marketing department, when I said I wanted to write The King's Mistress about Alice Perrers, they said, oh, you're going to confuse your fans, because I sell really well in England, and they were going to be upset if they picked up this book and there weren't a lot of corpses in it. And Owen Archer wasn't in it, or Margaret Carr wasn't in it. And so they wanted me to come up with a pseudonym for those 2 books. But these books, the Emma Campion books in Italy, where I'm really popular, come out under the name Candace Robb, because my Italian publisher said, "Are you nuts? You know, they'll sell if they're under your name." And instead of that, we're not going to put a pseudonym on it. So it's really confusing.
For the books that you have written, and I went online, and then I realized that you were using Emma
Yeah.
Campion, and so
Yeah.
then I just finished that book, The King's Mistress, which I totally enjoyed.
Oh, thank you.
And so I was looking forward to this new one, and I thought, well, if necessary, I guess I'll go on Amazon. So I was really delighted to see that you were having a reading.
Yeah, thank you.
Reselling them.
Thank you. Yeah, Carol, I worked with Carol at the Applied Physics Lab here on campus years ago when I was cooking up my first Owen Archer. That's when I was off on Wednesdays cooking up the Owen Archer mystery. Anyone else? Well, I'm here to sign books. And if you have an Owen Archer that you would like signed too, that would be fine. I am going to eventually go back to write more Owen Archers, but I'm also starting a new series that's set a little later in York right now. That's about just at the point where Richard II is being deposed by Henry Bolingbroke, so that I think that will be a lot of fun. And I figured out eventually that Owen Archer would be too old by that time to really have him, he would be in his 70s, to have him as a detective around the time of the usurpation. So I decided, well, I'll just have a new character. Anyway, thank you for coming out tonight. And I would like if we could all sing Happy Birthday to the U Bookstore. Can we do that? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, U Bookstore. Happy birthday to you. 115 years. Can you believe that? That's amazing. Thank you.